A member of JFK Jr.'s inner circle says he was at a crossroads at the time of his death 20 years ago today. Foremost in his mind was his rocky marriage to Carolyn Bessette.
There are love stories that make you cry. And then there are love stories so layered, so heartbreakingly human, that you don't know whether to feel joy or grief, because somehow it's both.
They were constantly bickering and fighting and over a whole series of things, whether or not to have a family. In that last year, told some people that he was thinking about getting a divorce.
This is one of those stories, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, America's golden couple. Two people desperately trying to hold on to each other while the whole world watched. Today, we're going deep into the full story, the passion, the pain, and the tragedy that still stops people cold. Born into legend. To understand this love story, you first have to understand the man at the center of it. And John F. Kennedy Jr. was not just a man, he was a symbol. From the moment he was born, he belonged, in some sense, to America. John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. came into the world on November 25, 1960, just 2 weeks after his father was elected the 35th President of the United States. He played under his father's desk in the Oval Office. He was photographed, laughing, and running through corridors that most people only see on guided tours. And then, on his 3rd birthday, the world turned to darkness. November 25, 1963. His father's funeral with a country in collective shock. And in the middle of all that grief, a tiny 3-year-old boy stepped forward and saluted his father's flag-draped coffin as it passed by. That photograph became one of the most iconic and heartbreaking images in American history. That little boy, nicknamed John by the press, was already carrying a weight that no child should ever have to carry. He grew up under his mother Jackie's careful protective watch, attending elite schools, then Brown University, then NYU Law. He passed the bar on his 3rd attempt, which made national news because even a Kennedy's personal struggles were public property. He worked as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan and won every single one of his 6 cases. Later, he launched George, a bold political and pop culture magazine, in 1995. In 1988, people named him the sexiest man alive. He dated Sarah Jessica Parker, Cindy Crawford, and most famously, actress Daryl Hannah. An intense on and off relationship that lasted years. But for all the glamour, John was deeply aware of the burden he carried, the weight of a name, the shadow of a father he barely knew. He was a man searching. And then, in 1992, he walked into a Calvin Klein showroom, and everything changed. Who was the woman who would make America's prince chase her and refuse to be just another chapter in his story? Carolyn Jean Bessette was born on January 7, 1966, in White Plains, New York, the youngest of 3 daughters. She grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, and was stunning from the beginning. Not just physically, though that was undeniable. She had a presence, a magnetism. She could walk into a room and command it without trying. Whip-smart, quick-witted, deeply empathetic, and fiercely loyal to the people she loved. She studied education at Boston University, but fashion was her world. After graduating, she landed at Calvin Klein in New York, working in publicity and VIP client relations. She was brilliant at her job. She knew how to make people feel seen, feel special, feel beautiful. And so it was, in 1992, that John F. Kennedy Jr. walked through the door of the Calvin Klein showroom for a private fitting. Carolyn was assigned to assist him. Their first interaction was electric. John was immediately taken. But Carolyn? She was not particularly impressed because she saw through the noise. There was chemistry, yes, but she was not the type to fall headfirst into something just because America's most eligible bachelor was interested. She had watched John go back and forth with Daryl Hannah for years, and she was not about to become a footnote in someone else's love story. So things between them stayed slow, fleeting, until John kept returning to Daryl Hannah and Carolyn kept her distance. But when the past finally let go, would Carolyn be willing to risk her heart on a man the entire world believed it already owned? The messy, complicated beginning. The Daryl Hannah situation is important to understand because it shaped the way Carolyn approached John for years. John and Daryl had been on and off since the late 80s, a turbulent, passionate 5-year relationship that John's mother Jackie reportedly opposed. Friends close to John said it was never quite right, like two people who cared for each other but kept getting in each other's way. When John finally decided to seriously pursue Carolyn after his final break from Daryl, she was cautious, almost resistant. Close friend Gustavo Paredes recalled, "She didn't think he was serious. He couldn't believe she turned him down. It had never happened before." And that tells you everything. Here was a man desired by almost every woman he'd ever met, and here was a woman who made him work for it, who didn't chase the Kennedy name, who needed convincing. One particularly dramatic incident from Elizabeth Beller's biography, a moment at a Tribeca restaurant where John, after hearing rumors from a so-called friend, confronted Carolyn with a letter accusing her of being a social climber. He tossed it at her and walked out. The fallout lasted a full year. Carolyn was done, and John spent months trying to win her back with no success. Eventually, they found their way back to each other. By 1994, after his final break from Daryl Hannah and his mother Jackie's death that May, John pursued Carolyn with real intention, and this time she opened the door. They began dating properly in 1994, and from the very first moment they were seen together in public, the world lost its mind. Because falling in love is hard enough in private, but what happens when every kiss, every argument, every mistake becomes front-page news? There is something almost cruel about what happens when fame attaches itself to love. Because love is private, built in quiet moments, inside jokes, shared silences. And when the whole world is watching, those moments become impossible. From the moment they went public, Carolyn Bessette became a target. Overnight, she was the most photographed woman in New York. Gossip columns tracked where they ate and what she wore. Paparazzi camped outside their Tribeca apartment at 20 North Moore Street, waiting, always waiting. For John, this was not new. He had a kind of grace under pressure that came from 30 years of practice. For Carolyn, it was terrifying. She had not chosen public life. She had chosen a man. And the price of that man was this. Elizabeth Beller described Carolyn's experience with the paparazzi as genuinely frightening. When she was alone, they would close in, yelling out provocations, trying to capture a look of distress. Carolyn told friends she was terrified of them. John saw how much it was hurting her. In a now famous moment outside their apartment, he turned to the photographers and said plainly, he asked them to give her room as she adjusted, and that it would be greatly appreciated. A rare public act of protectiveness. Despite all the chaos, their love was real. Friends described their dynamic as intense, deeply connected, sometimes combustible, but undeniably powerful. As Ariel Paredes told People, they would love hard and fight hard. But they were very much in love. In 1995, Carolyn moved into John's Tribeca loft, and that summer, John asked the most important question of his life. But even fairy tales have cracks, and the proposal that should have sealed their future would reveal just how fragile loving in public could be. The proposal, the fight, and the secret wedding. It was July 1995. John and Carolyn were on a fishing boat off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, the same waters that would, 4 years later, claim their lives. He spoke about life being better with a partner. He told her he wanted her to be his partner, and he asked her to marry him, presenting her with a platinum ring set with diamonds and sapphires. Carolyn did not say yes immediately. She waited 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sitting with what this meant, what it would mean to become a Kennedy, to step fully into that spotlight, to give up any remaining privacy forever. And then she said yes. But the road to the altar was not smooth. In February 1996, the couple was photographed in a now infamous argument in Washington Square Park. It was raw and ugly in the way that real arguments between real couples are. John, frustrated, tried to remove the engagement ring from Carolyn's finger. She shoved him. The whole thing was caught on camera and turned into an 8-page feature in the New York Daily News. It was humiliating. It was painful. And it was one of the first signs that loving each other in public was going to cost them something. But they pushed through it. They chose each other again, and when they finally married, they did it the way both of them would have wanted, completely and utterly in secret. September 21st, 1996. Cumberland Island, Georgia. A tiny, remote barrier island off the coast that was barely accessible and barely known to anyone outside of local circles. The ceremony took place in the First African Baptist Church, a small wooden chapel built by freed slaves in the 1800s. There were only 40 guests. Carolyn wore a silk bias-cut gown designed by Narciso Rodriguez, understated, ethereal, and so effortlessly perfect that it would go on to influence fashion for decades. John wore a simple dark suit. It was, by all accounts, one of the most beautiful and intimate weddings anyone had ever attended. And because the secrecy held long enough for the day to actually happen, it was, for one brief, precious moment, just theirs. The next day, John's cousin Patrick revealed the marriage to the press. By the time they returned to their Manhattan apartment, the cameras were already there. They had pulled off the perfect secret wedding. But could a marriage survive when privacy was already slipping through their fingers? 3 years. That is how long John and Carolyn were married. 3 years filled with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Passion, love, laughter, and terrible grinding stress. The paparazzi siege only intensified after the wedding. Carolyn described herself as feeling like a captive, unable to get a job without being accused of using her husband's name, unable to run a simple errand without a camera in her face. She had been a person with her own identity, her own career, her own sense of self, and now she was JFK Jr.'s wife, full stop. On top of the media pressure, the Kennedy family world was difficult to navigate. She had grown up in a regular household. The Kennedys were loud, close-knit, and relentlessly opinionated, and Carolyn always felt like an outsider who could never quite find her footing. Ethel Kennedy initially described her as all smoke and mirrors, though she would later reach out to Carolyn after a public spat and counsel her, even confiding that she too had once struggled with insecurity. The one person from John's world who Carolyn truly adored was Carol Radziwill, wife of his cousin Anthony. The two women became close friends, and it was through Carol that Carolyn was pulled into one of the most painful chapters of those married years, watching Anthony fight a losing battle with cancer. John was devastated. The two men had been raised practically as brothers. Carol later wrote in her memoir that Carolyn was the glue who kept people together. Through all of this, The media pressure, the family tension, Anthony's illness, John and Carolyn had their own private storms. Rumors of infidelity swirled on both sides, though close friends firmly denied the marriage was heading for divorce. They fought hard. The way people fight when they care too much and have no private space to exhale. By the spring of 1999, they had entered marriage counseling, not as a last resort, but because they loved each other and wanted to save what they had. These were not two people giving up. These were two people fighting for each other, even when it was hard. And when everything starts converging at once, which crack breaks first? The beginning of the end. By the summer of '99, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s life was converging on multiple pressure points simultaneously. His magazine, George, which he had launched with such ambition and excitement in 1995, was in serious financial trouble. His founding business partner had departed. The publishing house behind it was losing interest. The magazine was projected to lose nearly $10 million that year. John was scrambling for alternative financing, holding exploratory meetings, pulling long hours. The magazine was his baby, his attempt to reshape political journalism, to make it accessible and exciting and alive. And it was slipping away from him. At the same time, he was seriously considering a run for political office. Friends and biographers confirm that by early 1999, John was meeting with people to explore whether he would run for a Senate seat. The Kennedy political legacy was calling. He had always resisted it, wanting to build his own identity before stepping into that arena. But the time was beginning to feel right. And yet, his marriage, the most personal and private part of his world, was strained. By some accounts, he and Carolyn were spending time in separate residences. John had reportedly spent several nights at the Stanhope Hotel in New York in the final week of his life, having moved out of the apartment after an argument. He had even met an ex-girlfriend for lunch that week, though friends maintained there was nothing more to it than reconnecting as old friends. And yet, and this is what breaks you when you really sit with it, even through all of that, they were still planning a future together. They had an appointment booked with a real estate agent to look at houses outside the city. They were talking about starting a family. John desperately wanted children. Carolyn, who had been reluctant given the media circus of their lives, was coming around. They were not giving up. On July 16, 1999, Carolyn Bessette got on a plane. She had not wanted to go. The trip was to attend the wedding of Rory Kennedy, John's cousin, the youngest child of the late Robert F. Kennedy, in Hyannisport. Carolyn had been reluctant about the whole thing. She did not feel at ease with much of the Kennedy extended family, and the idea of a big family wedding held little appeal for her. John's personal assistant actually had to talk her into going, pointing out that it would reflect poorly on both of them if she stayed home. And according to those who knew Carolyn, the fact that she got on that plane was not resignation. It was love. It was a gesture. Biographer Liz McNeil described it as an act of reconciliation. Carolyn gets on the plane, and she's going to the family wedding with John, and makes this gesture of reconciliation. And that was very significant. She chose him. One more time. She chose them. And her sister Lauren came along for the ride. Carolyn Bessette was a successful investment banker at Morgan Stanley, confident and composed. She was close to both John and Carolyn. She was going to be dropped off at Martha's Vineyard before John and Carolyn continued on to Hyannisport. That morning, the morning of July 16th, John and Carolyn reconciled over the phone, according to biographer C. David Heyman. Whatever tension had existed between them in those final days, that morning They were okay. They were together. So how did a simple trip to a family wedding become the final chapter of one of America's most watched love stories? The plan was simple. Late afternoon, John and Lauren would leave from Essex County Airport in New Jersey, where John's plane, a 4-year-old Piper Saratoga he had purchased just 3 months prior, was waiting. Carolyn would join them separately, arriving a bit later due to New York City's relentless Friday evening traffic. John had received his private pilot's license in April 1998. He had approximately 300 hours of flying experience. Not a beginner, but not yet a seasoned pilot. He was only certified to fly under visual flight rules, meaning he relied on visual cues, landmarks, horizon lines, visible sky, to navigate. He was not yet instrument-rated, which would have allowed him to fly using only the cockpit instruments, independent of what he could see with his eyes. His flight instructor had offered to accompany him that night. John declined. He wanted to fly alone. The FAA cleared the plane for takeoff at 8:38 in the evening, right around sunset. The three of them climbed in, John up front, Carolyn and Lauren sitting in the rear-facing seats in the second row, back to back with the pilot's seat. The intended route followed the coastline of Connecticut, across Rhode Island Sound, toward Martha's Vineyard. A familiar enough path. But the weather that evening was not ideal. Hazy, moonless, the kind of night where the horizon disappears and sky and ocean blur into one undifferentiated darkness. It was still legally permissible to fly under visual conditions, but it was, as investigators would later note, challenging. As they approached Martha's Vineyard, something went wrong. Radar data captured what happened next. The plane, which had been descending normally, suddenly plummeted from 2,200 feet to 1,100 feet in just about 14 seconds. A rate of descent far beyond what was safe. And then, it disappeared from radar entirely. The NTSB would later determine what caused it: spatial disorientation. When a pilot cannot see the horizon, the body's inner ear can send false signals, telling you that you are level when you are banking or climbing when you are descending. Without instrument training and experience, a pilot can enter what's known as a graveyard spiral, an accelerating, uncontrolled descent that happens so fast and so quietly that there is no time to recover. John F. Kennedy Jr. did not know he was falling until it was too late. The plane hit the water at approximately 9:41 p.m. The impact was catastrophic and instantaneous. All three died on impact. But for 5 agonizing days, no one knew that yet. And during those 5 days, the entire country held its breath. When the world held its breath, the alarm was raised when a couple waiting to pick Lauren up at Martha's Vineyard Airport noticed the plane had not arrived. A maintenance worker at the airport made calls. No one could reach John. Carol Radziwill, Anthony's wife, Carolyn's close friend, was the one who called the Coast Guard to report the plane missing. What followed was 5 days of agonizing uncertainty for the nation, and for 2 devastated families. The search was massive. President Bill Clinton authorized the full resources of the U.S. government to assist. Boats, helicopters, and Navy divers combed the Atlantic. Debris, a black suitcase belonging to Carolyn, was found in the ocean. Hope dwindled. Grief began to settle in before there was even confirmation. On July 21st, divers found the wreckage roughly 8 miles from shore, on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. John was still strapped into his seat. Carolyn and Lauren were found near the fuselage. Autopsies confirmed what the crash had already told everyone who had been paying attention. They had all died upon impact. John was 38 years old. Carolyn was 33. Lauren was 34. On July 22nd, 6 days after the crash, the Kennedy and Bessette families gathered aboard the USS Briscoe, a Navy missile destroyer. The three of them were cremated, and their ashes were scattered at sea, not far from where they had fallen. At the request of Senator Ted Kennedy, it was private, intimate, the way John and Carolyn would have wanted any of it to be. The nation mourned, the kind of mourning that you feel in your bones, because this was not just the loss of a celebrity couple. This was the loss of the last son of Camelot, the little boy who had saluted his father's coffin, the man who had somehow, against all the weight of history and expectation, managed to become himself, and the woman who had loved him, complicated, imperfect, extraordinary Carolyn, who deserved so much more time to be known for who she truly was. And the question became, who, if anyone, was responsible for what happened that night? In the immediate aftermath, there was, as there always is, a rush to assign blame. Some tried to point the finger at Carolyn, saying it was her fault they were late departing, that she delayed things with a pedicure, that her reluctance to go caused some chain of events. Those who actually knew the truth pushed back firmly. Elizabeth Beller confirmed the facts. Carolyn had left the salon by 5 p.m. They were all in cars headed to the airport at the same time. New York City traffic on a Friday evening was what it was. And John was not flying recklessly or illegally. He was flying within the bounds of his certification. He simply wasn't experienced enough to handle the conditions that night. Others rushed to paint their marriage as a doomed disaster, citing infidelity, divorce rumors, substances allegations. Friends who were actually close to the couple rejected those narratives. John Perry Barlow and Christiane Amanpour, both close to John, acknowledged that yes, they fought, and yes, Carolyn struggled with the media attention, but they denied the more sensational accusations and denied that divorce had ever been genuinely on the table. The more honest picture is this. John and Carolyn were two flawed, passionate, loving human beings who were trying to build a real marriage in an environment that made real almost impossible. They fought the way people in love fight when they're overwhelmed and exhausted. They struggled the way anyone would struggle under that level of scrutiny. And they were trying, actively, intentionally, hopefully trying, to find a way through to the other side. They were house hunting. They were planning a family. They were in counseling because they wanted to stay. And on the last night of her life, Carolyn Bessette got on a plane she didn't want to take. To go to a wedding she wasn't sure she wanted to attend because she chose love over comfort. She chose her husband over her fear. That is who she was. And John was the man who chased her, who kept chasing her even when she turned him away, who stood outside their apartment building and asked the paparazzi, plainly and publicly, to leave his wife alone, who proposed on a fishing boat and married her in a secret ceremony on a remote island in Georgia because he knew what she needed, who was, despite everything, deeply, thoroughly in love with a woman who made him work for every single inch. But whether any love, under that kind of pressure, could have survived at all. Echoes of grief and legacy. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's mother, Anne Freeman, later reached a wrongful death settlement with JFK Jr.'s estate. Lauren Bessette's family grieved the loss of a brilliant, accomplished woman who never got the chance to live the full life she was building. Anthony Radziwill, the cousin John had loved like a brother, died just a month after John in August 1999, as if the universe had taken them all at once. Carol Radziwill lost her husband and her closest friends within weeks of each other. The grief was unimaginable. But here is what I want you to take away from this story. Carolyn Bessette was not just a style icon. She was not just a footnote in the Kennedy mythology. She was a woman of extraordinary grace and depth. Someone described by everyone who really knew her, not for her looks or her fashion sense, but for her compassion, for the way she showed up for people, for the way she loved. And John F. Kennedy Jr. was not just America's prince. He was a man who had carried the weight of an entire nation's grief since he was 3 years old and had somehow turned that weight into something decent and human and real. Together, they were imperfect and complicated and deeply, achingly in love. And maybe that's the part that lingers the longest. Not just the tragedy, but the humanity of it all. The ordinary pieces inside an extraordinary life. The unanswered phone calls, the half-finished conversations, the plans scribbled on notepads, the quiet promises made in kitchens and late at night when no cameras were around. For all the mythology surrounding the Kennedy name, at the center of this story were two people trying to figure it out, like everyone else. Two people navigating pride and vulnerability, pressure and tenderness, expectation and fear. They were not frozen in that final headline. They were alive in the messy, beautiful middle of becoming something stronger. And that's what makes it hurt. Because their story wasn't closing. It was still unfolding. Their story is beyond heartbreaking. Not because it ended, though God knows that ending is devastating, but because of everything that was still possible. The house outside the city, the children they were going to have, the quieter life they were reaching for, the reconciliation that was already in motion on that last day. It was all right there. And then, in 14 seconds of falling, it was gone. Rest easy, John. Rest easy, Carolyn. Rest easy, Lauren. And to everyone watching, if you're in love with someone, tell them today. Fight for them. Choose them, especially when it's hard. Because some planes don't come back. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, subscribe to this channel for more. We tell the stories that deserve to be told the way they deserve to be told. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.